The day you finally got it, you felt almost nothing. You expected the opposite. You had rehearsed this moment for years. The signature on the contract, the keys warm in your hand, the figure in the account you used to be afraid to even write down. And there it was. Real, done, yours. You stood in the middle of it and waited for the feeling to arrive. And a different feeling came instead. A flatness, a quiet you never ordered. So you told yourself you were tired. You told yourself it would land tomorrow, after you rested, once the next piece fell into place. So you found the next piece, and you reached again. Here is what no one prepares you for. It is not failing to get what you want that hollows people out. It is getting it. The strange emptiness waiting on the other side of the door you broke yourself to open. By now, you have a theory about this. You think it means you wanted the wrong thing, that if you had only aimed at something worthier, the fullness would have stayed. So you are already scanning for a better target, a cleaner dream, a higher number, the one that finally holds. I want to offer you something harder, and in the end, kinder. The life you have been chasing was never out there to be caught. What you keep calling your goal is closer to a residue, the mark left behind by a change already moving through you, slowly, with or without your consent. And all that chasing, all that reaching, the constant aim at the next thing, is not carrying you toward it. It is the one thing holding it away. So for the next hour, put down the only question you have ever known how to ask, the one that begins with "How do I get?" We are going to sit with a stranger question, the same one that people who gave their whole lives to the study of transformation reached only after everything else had failed them. Not how do you get the life you want, but how do you become the person it already belongs to? There were people who spent their entire lives on the exact problem you are living right now. Not the problem of how to get what they wanted, the problem of why getting it never turned out to be enough. We remember them badly. When you hear the word alchemist, you probably picture a confused old man hunched over a furnace, trying to turn a lump of lead into gold, failing at it for 40 years. A fool with soot on his hands, chasing a fantasy that chemistry would later laugh at. That picture is almost exactly upside down. These were some of the most careful minds of their time, and most of them were not really trying to make gold at all. The metal, the fire, the sealed glass vessel, the endless instructions written in language no outsider could follow. It was a code, a disguise. They buried what they were really doing inside the vocabulary of the workshop, partly because the knowledge was dangerous in the wrong hands, and partly because it could not be handed to anyone who had not already begun the work themselves. What they were actually working on was a person, themselves. The furnace was a mirror. Every stage they described, the burning, the dissolving, the blackening, the slow forming of something new, was a stage they were watching unfold inside their own consciousness. The lead was never a metal. The lead was the version of you that shows up heavy, reactive, half asleep, running on reflex. And the gold was not a metal either. The gold was what that same consciousness becomes once it stops running and starts to cook. At the very top of all this work sat one thing. The thing they circled for those entire lifetimes. They called it the Philosopher's Stone. Here is the detail that should stop you cold. The Philosopher's Stone was not, in the end, discovered. It was understood. There was no final substance to extract, no last missing ingredient that completed the recipe. The whole enormous labor collapsed into a single recognition, the kind that rearranges a person the instant it arrives. The stone was never something you obtain. It was a way of seeing that you slowly become capable of. That one sentence cuts directly across the way you have been taught to live. Everything around you trained you to acquire. Finish the list, hit the target, reach the next rung, and the reward will be waiting. So you have been treating the life you want the way the cartoon alchemist treated his gold, as a substance to get hold of, a result sitting at the end of enough effort. And like him, you keep feeding the furnace, and the thing you wanted keeps refusing to become the thing you actually needed. People ask whether any of this touches something as ordinary as money. It does, and the old thinkers were blunt about it. Prosperity was never thrown out of the work, but it was never the point of it either. It was a facet, one face of a far larger stone, and the moment someone made that single face the center of everything, the whole thing went dead in their hands. You have probably met a person who got rich and stayed hollow. You may have been that person for a season of your life. That is not a failure of the money. That is what happens when one facet is ordered to do the work of the whole. There is a deeper layer underneath all of this, and I want to name exactly what kind of claim it is before I hand it to you. The alchemists believed that beneath every visible thing there is one source, an ocean with no shape, out of which all forms rise, and back into which they fall. They called it the prima materia, the first matter. The strange part, when modern physics went looking at the very bottom of the visible world, it found something it can barely describe any other way. A restless, formless field that everything seems to emerge from. I am not telling you the mystics proved the physics, or that the physics blesses the mystics. Hold it as a lens, not a verdict. But keep the shape of the idea, because it matters for where we are about to go. If everything that takes form rises out of one shared source, then the whole question of how you get something out there begins to soften. There may be no out there in the way you picture it. And this is the place where the ground under your usual strategy starts to move. Because if the thing those people prized above all else was a recognition and not an object, if prosperity and peace are facets of something larger and go inert the instant you chase them head on, if there is no clean border between the life out there and the person standing in here, then the entire method you have used your whole life to get what you want may rest on a mistake about where that life actually comes from. So here is the turn, and once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. You have been asking the wrong question your entire life, and asking it with real discipline. How do I get it? How do I get the money, the love, the calm, the certainty that I have finally arrived? You ran your life like a campaign, with you as the strategist, out there, acquiring. But if the life you want is the residue of who you are becoming, then no amount of getting will ever produce it. You cannot acquire your way into a different self. You can only become that self, and then watch the life rearrange itself around the person you now are. This is not a gentler version of the same chase. It is the opposite motion. The chase points outward at the target. This points inward, at the one doing the aiming. The people at the furnace never reached for the gold. They became the kind of consciousness in which lead was no longer possible, and the treasure followed as a side effect, never as the goal. Feel what that cost you. It means the dream you have been guarding, the one out there on the horizon, was never your real work. Your real work is the person standing right here, the one you keep trying to drag across a finish line. That person is the laboratory. That person is the lead. And nothing out there changes until something in here does. Before we go down into how that change actually happens, I want one honest answer from you, and the comments are the place to leave it. Bring to mind the thing you have been chasing hardest. Now ask yourself the question that turns this whole video around. Who would you have to become for that thing to finally feel like enough? Write it below, even in a few words. Naming it is the first small act of the work itself, and I read what you leave there. Because here is what no one tells you about becoming that person. It does not arrive by deciding. It arrives by going through something. And the ones at the furnace map that something in exact stages, the first of which is already happening to you, probably right now, wearing the disguise of the worst part of your life. The first stage does not announce itself as transformation. It shows up looking like the worst stretch of your life. It comes disguised as the plateau that will not break no matter how hard you push against it, as the relationship that quietly goes hollow while nothing visible ever goes wrong, as the success you finally reach and feel nothing at all standing inside of, and underneath all of it, that slow, humiliating suspicion that the strategy which carried you this far has simply stopped working. And you cannot understand why, because you are doing everything you always did, only harder now. The old thinkers put this stage first, and they were not gentle about it. They called it the fire. Understand what the fire is for, because everything downstream depends on not misreading it. The fire is not punishment. It is not bad luck, and it is not the universe turning against you, though it will feel like all three while you are standing in the middle of it. The fire burns off whatever in you cannot make the rest of the journey, and the very first thing it comes for is the one who has been doing all the chasing, the strategist, the part of you that believed if it just acquired enough, controlled enough, arranged the pieces well enough, the emptiness would finally close for good. The fire exists to take that one apart, not because it is evil, because it is far too small to hold the life you keep saying you want. Here is what almost no one survives with their understanding intact. The moment the fire arrives, every instinct you own screams the same command. Make it stop. Get back to comfort. Find the next goal, the next purchase, the next plan, the next person, anything that restores the old familiar feeling of reaching for something. And so most people spend the entire fire frantically rebuilding the exact self. The fire came to dissolve. They feel the heat, they panic, and they pour everything they have left into staying the same. Then they wonder why the same crisis keeps returning, a little larger each time, wearing a slightly different face. You know this fire more intimately than you would like to admit. It is the 3 a.m. ceiling you have memorized, lying awake beside a life that looks, from the outside, like one you ought to be grateful for. It is the Sunday evening wait that arrives before anything has even gone wrong. It is the moment a friend asks how you are, and you hear yourself say fine, and some quiet part of you flinches at how automatic the lie has become. You have been calling it stress, or burnout, or a rough patch, and reaching for whatever makes it quiet down. But it does not want to be quieted. It wants to be allowed. Let me show you a man who did the opposite. Not a saint, not a guru, a careful, ambitious professional who, by every measure the world keeps score with, had already won. By his early 40s, Carl Jung had everything the chase promises: an international reputation, a thriving practice, a wife, children, a house on the lake, the respect of the most important men in his field. He had acquired the life, and then, by his own account, the ground simply opened underneath him. A disorientation he could not explain away. Images and visions he could not switch off. A flood rising from somewhere beneath the successful man he had so carefully built, so violent that he genuinely believed he might be losing his mind. He had climbed all the way to the summit of the acquiring life and found the fire waiting for him there. What he did next is the reason we still say his name. He did not run. He did not bury it under more work, more achievement, more reaching for the next respectable prize. He chose, deliberately, with his eyes open, to go down into it, to stop defending the self that was coming apart, and instead to follow the descent and see where it actually led. He wrote it down, he painted it, he sat inside that darkness on and off for years, and the man who eventually climbed back out was not the man who had gone down. The work of his entire life, ideas the world still leans on a century later, came out of the years he spent in a fire he refused to flee. Now look closely at what actually turned the key, because it was not the suffering. Suffering on its own transforms no one. There are people who suffer for 50 years and only grow harder, more bitter, more heavily armored. What turned the key in him was a single, almost invisible movement. He stopped clenching. He let the old self come apart instead of holding it together by sheer force of will. The old thinkers were obsessed with that exact movement, and they were precise about one detail that changes everything: the dissolving, the stage where the hardened self finally softens and breaks down, only works when it is allowed, when it is chosen freely. You cannot be forced into it. You cannot fake your way through it. The whole process stalls the instant you try to do it under pressure, or for show, or as one more clever technique to reach the prize a little faster. It asks for the one thing the chasing self has never once offered in your entire life: a genuine letting go. And I want to be careful with that phrase because letting go has been worn down into a greeting card slogan that means almost nothing. Most of the time it gets used to mean stop feeling bad, which is just the chase wearing softer clothes. That is not what this is. Real letting go is not pretending the loss does not hurt. It is not floating above your own life in some forced, glassy serenity. It is something far more ordinary and far harder than either. It is the moment you stop demanding that this particular pain be removed before you will agree to keep living. It is unclenching the hand that has been gripping the outcome so tightly that you forgot it was even clenched. It is saying, quietly, with no audience and no performance, I do not have to fix this today. I can let it work on me. It can be that small. The text you finally do not send. The explanation you stop rehearsing in the shower. The grip loosened by a single degree. You will not feel powerful when you do it. At first you will feel like you are losing, because the part of you that measures everything as winning or losing is precisely the part being dissolved. And it will narrate its own death as defeat the entire way down. That feeling of losing is not a warning sign. It is the exact sensation of the fire doing what it came to do. And then comes the part no one warns you about. As the chasing self comes apart, you lose your map. The questions you always steered your life by. What do I want? How do I get it? Am I ahead or behind? Go quiet, or stop returning any answer that satisfies. There is a stretch in here that feels like nothing at all. No clear desire, no clear direction, no reassuring sense of making progress. The old self is mostly gone, and whoever comes next has not yet formed. The alchemists knew this stretch intimately. They called it the blackening, and they understood it as the single most important phase of the entire work, and the one where the most people quit, because it does not feel like becoming someone new. It feels like quietly disappearing. The alchemist watched it happen inside the sealed glass, the matter going dark, lightless, dead-looking, and he was taught not to panic, not to throw the vessel out, not to start the whole thing over, to let it stay black. Your version comes with no glass and no instructions. It looks like the gray months where you function perfectly and feel almost nothing, where you keep every appointment and cannot quite remember why any of them matter. Everything in you wants to read that as proof that something has gone wrong. It is the opposite. It is proof the old self is finally actually coming undone. So sit with one question before we go any further down. When the fire took your map, when you genuinely could not tell whether you were transforming or simply falling apart, what did you do with that emptiness? Did you stay inside it? Or did you reach, fast, for the first thing that promised to make you feel like yourself again? Be honest, because your answer is the whole hinge. The people who learn to stay do not turn into floating, detached, serene escape artists. They go in the one direction the chasing self is most terrified of, and it is not the direction you would ever guess. Down. The direction the chasing self is most afraid of is not forward, and it is certainly not up. It is down. And to understand why that single word terrifies it, you have to see the very clever trick the ego pulls the moment it hears that transformation is required of it. Watch it happen, because it will happen in you. The instant a person realizes that getting things has not filled them, they almost never stop reaching. They simply change the target. Now they reach for enlightenment, for higher states, for a serene, luminous version of themselves that floats above all this mess and never feels the ache again. They collect spiritual practices the way they used to collect promotions. They read the next book the next retreat, learn the next technique, and quietly keep score. Am I more awakened than I was last year? Am I ahead? It is the identical hunger. It has only changed its clothes. You can see it in the small evidence. The meditation streak you guard carefully while the hard conversation with your brother goes another year unspoken. The shelf of books underlined in 3 colors, sitting above a temper that still detonates over a slow checkout line. The retreat that left you weightless on Sunday night and a stranger to yourself again by Tuesday lunch. None of that is failure. It is just the chase, proving it can survive inside spiritual language as easily as it ever survived inside money. The old thinkers saw this trap with cold clarity, and they built their entire instruction to defeat it. Because what they tell you to do is the exact opposite of what the seeker expects. You want to ascend. They say first, you come all the way down, into the body, into the ordinary, into the unglamorous, unfinished, deeply unspiritual facts of the life you are actually living. They had a stage for this, and it is the one the seeker secretly hates. After the fire, after the dissolving, after the long blackness where the old self comes undone, the work does not drift off into the heavens. It does the reverse. It condenses. It thickens. It takes on weight and form and lands. The spirit, they said, has to get a body again, and this step cannot be skipped. There is no version where you rise straight out of your dissolved self into pure light and stay there. Whatever new self is forming has to move in. It has to take up residence in this life, in this body, on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon, or it is not real. It is just one more beautiful idea the mind built to avoid the work. Sit with how strange that turn is. You came looking for transcendence, and the deepest teaching of the people who studied this the longest points you straight back at the dishes stacked in your sink, at the unpaid bill, at the aging body, the difficult parent, the job that bores you, the marriage that asks more of you than you feel like giving today. None of these are obstacles to your becoming. They are the laboratory where the becoming actually takes place. You do not rise above your life to be transformed. You get transformed by climbing all the way down into it. The friction you have been trying to pray your way out of is the exact grit the work requires. Sand is what turns inside the oyster. Strip every difficult person, every dull obligation, every unmet need out of your life, and you would not ascend. You would simply stop being worked on. The alchemists never asked for a purer set of materials. They asked you to stay with the ones you already have. This is where the phrase the alchemists used stops being poetry and becomes a practice. They spoke of spiritualizing matter, not escaping matter, spiritualizing it, meeting the most ordinary corner of your existence with the full presence of the self that walked back out of the fire, the same commute, the same kitchen, the same tired face in the same bathroom mirror, met now by someone who is no longer running from a single part of it. Nothing in the scenery has to change. The one standing there looking at it has changed completely. It looks like nothing at all from the outside. It is washing the one plate in front of you as if it were the only thing in the world, instead of rehearsing the whole evening while your hands move on autopilot. It is letting the red light be a pause instead of an insult. It is staying inside your own chest for the length of one boring meeting. Unremarkable. Every single time. And every single time, the laboratory is quietly running. And here is the quiet reason the chasing self fights this with everything it has left. As long as the work stays up in the clouds, in ideas and insights and elevated states, the ego is perfectly safe. It gets to feel like it is transforming while never once putting its feet on the ground. It can talk about presence for a decade and never be present for one difficult conversation. It can love humanity in the abstract and stay impossible to live with on a Wednesday. The fantasy of ascent is the ego's final hiding place. It lets you feel holy without ever having to land. Coming down is dangerous to the old self for one simple reason. Down is the one place it can no longer hide. So let me take you back to the man at the lake, because the end of his story is nowhere near where you would expect a story like that to end. When Carl Jung came back up out of those years in the dark, the years of visions and near collapse, the years of staying sealed inside his own depths instead of fleeing them, he did not float off into guruhood. He did not announce that he had risen above the human condition. He did something almost comically grounded. On a quiet strip of land at the edge of the water, in a place called Bollingen, he started to build a tower, out of stone, with his own hands. Real rock, real mortar, the heavy and unglamorous labor of it, hauling and cutting and setting the stone himself. Over the decades, he kept adding to it, room by room, carving figures into the walls, with no electricity and no running water. He even cut a great square block and covered its faces with inscriptions, leaving in stone the things he could not say any other way. He cooked. He sailed. He kept seeing his patients. He lived a plain, embodied life in a plain, embodied place. The man who had gone further down into the depths than almost anyone came back, and grounded himself in stone you could put your hand on. That is not a charming hobby, and it is not a coincidence. It is the final stage made visible. The descent is not completed by ascending out of it. It is completed by building something solid and real and ordinary in the world you actually live in. He spiritualized the matter, quite literally, with his hands, in rock you can still go and touch today. Now bring all of it back to your own life, because everything we have built points to one plain recognition. The life you have spent years trying to rise above, the boring, frictioned, unfinished material one, was never the thing standing between you and your transformation. It was the only place your transformation could ever have happened. Every time you reached for spirituality, or ambition, or the next big goal to lift yourself up out of the ordinary ache of simply being here, you stepped out of the one laboratory that actually works. Think about what that does to the dream you have been chasing. You always pictured it as a destination somewhere above your current life. Cleaner, lighter, free of all this weight. But if becoming happens by descending into the ordinary, then the dream was never waiting up there at all. The version of you that the life belongs to is not a more transcendent you. It is a more grounded one, more here, more able to stand inside a plain, imperfect day without constantly needing to be somewhere else. That is the self that prosperity and peace and love quietly arrange themselves around. Not because it earned them by reaching, but because it finally stopped leaving the room where they were always waiting. And watch what that quietly does to the people around you. Because this is where the inner work stops being private and starts changing your actual circumstances. The grounded self is not only more at peace, it is more available, more trustworthy, easier to be near, and far harder to knock off balance. And opportunities, the real ones, do not fall out of a generous sky onto the people who deserve them most. They travel, almost always, through the hands of other people. And other people lean, without quite knowing why, toward the one who is genuinely present with them, the one who is not performing attention while already halfway into the next thing. So much of what you have been calling luck, or timing, or the universe finally deciding to reward you, turns out under inspection to be exactly this: a life slowly rearranging itself around a person who has, at last, stopped leaving the room. So the whole picture turns over one final time. For years you were certain the dream was the cause, and a better version of you was the prize you would collect once you finally arrived there. It runs the other way. The grounded self is the cause. The life is what gathers around it. And the prosperity you chased head-on, the prosperity that kept backing away from you the harder you ran, becomes something quieter and stranger. The residue of a person other people and life itself want to gather near. And that raises the real question, the one the entire final stretch of this turns on. If becoming is not a place you arrive at, and not a height you climb to, but something that happens while you stand fully inside your ordinary life, then what exactly is doing the work? What is the force that actually moves through a grounded life and shapes it from underneath? In the long stretches when you are no longer the one straining at the controls, because something is, and it is not your effort. It never quite was. You will not like the first part of the answer, because it takes the wheel out of your hands. Whatever it is that moves through a grounded life and shapes it is not a force you produce. You do not generate it by trying harder, by wanting more cleanly, by believing with greater intensity. It was never waiting on your effort. If anything, your effort was most of what stood in its way. Picture it plainly. The chasing self was a dam, a high wall of wanting and managing and controlling, thrown up across a river that was always, quietly, trying to flow. Every single thing you did to force the outcome poured another foot of concrete into that wall. And then you stood there, baffled, wondering why the water never reached your fields. So understand what all that earlier work was really for. The fire, the dissolving, the long climb down into the ordinary. None of it was about building something new in you. It was about taking the dam down, clearing the channel, so that what had been pressing against you your whole life could finally move through. So what is the water? What is the thing that flows once you stop blocking it? The old thinkers had an answer that sounds strange, right up until the day you have lived enough to recognize it. They said you are not the first to become. The patterns of a deepening human life are older than you, by a very long way. Older than your name, older than your wounds, older than the particular story you tell about yourself. There are ways of being a person that have moved through human beings for as long as there have been human beings. The elder who has grown patient, the healer who has suffered and softened instead of hardening, the one who can finally hold steady in a storm. Centuries after the alchemists, that same careful man at the lake gave these patterns a name. He called them archetypes, and he meant something deeply practical by it. He meant that when you stop frantically defending your small, managed self, you do not collapse into chaos. You fall back into an older pattern that already knows how to live. Something far more ancient than your personality begins to rise up through the cleared ground and live as you. I want to be honest about what kind of claim that is. Whether these patterns are literally woven into the species or are simply the deep grooves that any long human life eventually wears into the same shape. The careful thinkers argued about among themselves. Hold it as a lens, not a law. But notice how precisely it matches your own experience of the rare, good moments. The times you acted with a steadiness that felt very slightly larger than you. That did not feel manufactured. That you could not have produced on command, no matter how hard you tried. You were not performing the wise version of yourself in those moments. You had, just for a breath, gotten out of your own way, and something steadier moved through you. You have a memory of it, even if you have never given it a name. The crisis where everyone expected you to come apart, and instead a strange calm arrived from somewhere and simply handled it. The exact right words to a frightened child or a grieving friend. Words you did not compose in advance and could not repeat now if you tried. The decision that quietly made itself the moment you finally stopped agonizing over it. You called it luck, or instinct, or just a good day. It was none of those. It was the cleared channel for one unguarded moment, letting something through that was wiser than the self you usually spend your energy defending. There is a second half to this engine, and it is the part the old thinkers guarded most carefully of all. They believed that everything which exists rises out of a single source, the formless first matter we named earlier, the ocean underneath all things, and they believed that a self which has been cleared and grounded does not have to chase its life across that ocean. It resonates, like a struck note that sets a nearby string humming at the very same pitch. A coherent inner state calls a matching outer one slowly into form. They did not think you fetch your life by force. They thought you tuned to it, and that it answers. Once again, I am handing you a lens, not a proven machine. The instant anyone sells you resonance as a guaranteed law that pays out on demand, they have quietly turned it back into the chase, and you already know exactly where that road ends. But as a way of seeing, it rearranges everything. It means the real question was never how hard can I push. It was how clear, how coherent, how undivided can I become. Because the life does not answer your strain. It answers your state. You have felt this from the other side too. Every time a certain kind of person walked into a tense room, they did not announce anything. They did not work the crowd. Something in them was simply settled. And within a few minutes, the whole room had quietly reorganized around that settledness. Voices lowering, shoulders dropping, the entire field retuning to the steadiest note present in it. That is resonance you can watch with your own eyes. Now imagine being that note in your own life. not by performing calm, but by actually being undivided. The circumstances that begin to gather around such a person are not a prize they earned. They are an echo. And this, at last, is why all that effort betrayed you, and why it betrayed you most cruelly on the days you tried the hardest. Effort, the gripping kind, is simply the chasing self climbing back up behind the controls. It is the dam going up again, one anxious foot at a time. Every time you forced, you split yourself in two. One part wanting the thing, another part standing back, watching to see whether the wanting was working yet. And a divided note does not resonate. It just makes noise. The grounded self moves the world for the exact opposite reason. It is not straining toward anything. It is whole. It rings as one clear tone. And let me draw one hard line right here, because this is precisely where these ideas get sold cheaply. This is not the promise that the right mood will order the universe to deliver a car to your driveway. It is almost the reverse. You are not commanding reality to hand over what you want. You are becoming someone so undivided that you no longer need most of what you used to chase, and the rest tends to arrive quietly through ordinary doors, because a coherent life simply walks into fewer walls. There is no guarantee buried in it. Anyone who promises you one is only selling the chase back to you in brighter packaging, which tells you finally what the work truly is from here forward. It is not a summit you reach and then stand on for the rest of your life. It is a channel you keep clear or let silt back up, one ordinary day at a time. There is no morning when you wake permanently transformed, the river flowing forever, nothing left for you to do. There is only ever this. Today, in this hour, am I damming the thing up, or am I letting it move? Some mornings the channel clears in a single breath. Some mornings it stays clogged until noon, and you work with the little that gets through. Neither one means you have won or lost. They are only weather, passing across a practice that has no finish line to cross. The elder who has lived this way for 50 years is not a man who finished. He is a man who, this morning, cleared the channel one more time, the way he did yesterday, the way he will again tomorrow. The mastery was never arrival. It is return, coming back and back and back again, to the same small unclenching of the same tired hand. So when you stand back from it, the engine has three moving parts that are really one single motion. You let go, and the channel clears. An older, deeper pattern rises to live through the cleared ground, and a whole, undivided self resonates until the life slowly tunes itself toward you. Surrender, pattern, resonance. Three names for the one act of getting out of your own way. And the chasing self heard all three and asked the very same question of each one. Yes, fine, but how do I do that faster? That question is about to cost it everything. And here, right here, is where the most stubborn part of you makes its final move. Because some part of you has been listening to all of this, nodding along and quietly sharpening it into a brand new target. All right, it says, so I clear the channel. I let the deeper pattern move through me. I become coherent and whole. And then I arrive at the open, flowing, transformed life. Do you see what it just did? It took the one teaching built to end the chase forever and made it the finish line of a brand new chase. It is still standing exactly one step outside your own life, certain that the real thing begins after just one more step. That move, that last, almost invisible move. It is the final wall, and until it falls, none of this is yours. So stop and look directly at the one who is still asking, the part of you that wants to clear the channel and arrive, that wants to finish the becoming, complete it, and finally set the work down. Look at it closely, because it is the same self that has run your entire life. It did not burn in the fire. It did not dissolve in the descent. It survived every single stage by promising to reach the finish line just one more time. It only traded a worldly finish line for a spiritual one. The chase did not end when you turned inward. It put on robes and kept right on running. And here is the recognition the old thinkers circled for entire lifetimes, the one that does the last and deepest cut. There is no arrival. There is no morning you cross over into the finished, transformed life and lay the work down for good. That day is the chasing self's most beautiful lie, the final story it tells to keep itself alive one more season. Because as long as you believe in the arrival, you stay a seeker. And a seeker, by definition, is someone who is not here, someone standing one step outside their own life, forever, waiting for permission to walk in. Feel the floor go. If there is no arrival, then the person you have been your whole life, the one on the way, the one almost there, the one who will finally be enough once the becoming is complete, that person was never going to make it across. Not because they failed, because there is no across. The seeker can never reach the destination, for the simplest and most devastating reason there is. The seeker is the only thing standing between you and it. This is the death. Not a metaphor, not a gentle image to nod along to, the real death of a self-image you have worn so long you mistook it for your own face. The one who is going to get there has to die, so that the one who is already here can finally be felt. The stone, remember, was understood, not discovered. Your transformation was never going to be finished, it was only ever going to be recognized. And in the instant it is, the instant the seeker falls, the entire machinery of reaching, planning, measuring, leaving, has nothing left to do. It simply goes quiet. You do not arrive at the life that belongs to you. You stop being the one who keeps leaving it. The door you spent your whole life straining toward was never locked, and never far. You were just never still long enough to notice you were already standing on the other side of it. So stay here, in the silence, right after the seeker falls. Do not rush to make it mean something. Do not reach for the next insight. That is only the chase, reaching again. Just stay, because something is about to rise into that silence on its own, without your effort, the way it always wanted to. And it is the very thing you spent your whole life chasing, in every direction, but this one. And so you stay. What comes is not dramatic. That is the first surprise, and somehow the hardest one to forgive. You braced for thunder, for white light, for the grand arrival the seeker spent your whole life promising. And instead what comes is quiet, close, almost embarrassingly ordinary. It rises the way warmth comes back into a hand you did not realize had gone numb. So gradually you cannot name the moment it began. What rises is you, only you, the one who was here the entire time, underneath all the chasing, waiting with the patience of something that was never in a hurry because it was never going anywhere. It had nowhere to get to. It was already home. You feel it first in the body because the body never left. The breath, arriving lower and slower than it has in years. The plain weight of you in the chair, the air on your skin. The chasing self lived almost entirely in the head, leaning forever forward into a future that never came. What rises now settles back down the spine and into the floor, and for the first time in longer than you can remember, all of you is in one place at one time. That alone, just that, is most of what you were ever looking for. And here is what the stillness shows you, the recognition that rearranges everything behind it. Every description you ever wrote of the life you wanted, the peace, the fullness, the sense of being at last enough, was never a description of a place. It was a description of a person. The person you become the moment you stop leaving the room. And that person is not waiting at the end of one more decade of effort. That person is the one breathing here, now, hearing these words. You were never far from the life that belongs to you. You were standing inside it the whole time, with your back turned, scanning the horizon for it. Let me take you somewhere ordinary, because the ordinary is the only place this is ever true. A kitchen at the end of a plain evening, the last of the light going amber on the wall, warm water moving over a plate in your hands, and the small sounds of someone you love in the next room. For your whole life, a moment like this was nothing. Dead time. something to get through on the way to the moment that would finally count. And now standing in it, actually inside it, you feel the floor of it open into something enormous. The warmth of the water, the light, the sheer fact of being alive here, in a body, on an evening that will never come again. Nothing has been added. You simply stopped leaving, and the ordinary turned out to have no bottom. Then look at a face. The face of someone you have seen 10,000 times and somewhere along the way stopped truly seeing. Look now, from the cleared and quiet place, the small lines that were not there when you met, the way the years have written themselves across someone who chose, in every one of those years, to stay close to you. You were so busy reaching past them toward the life you were building that you almost missed the truth. They were the life you were building. None of it was ever ahead of you. It was beside you, the entire time, asking only to be seen. Now remember the day you got the thing you wanted and felt almost nothing. You understand it now. That emptiness was never proof you had wanted the wrong thing. It was the silence of a room you walked into and instantly left, your eyes already fixed on the next door. The fullness you kept waiting for could not reach you, because you never stood still long enough to receive it. It is reaching you now, and not because a single thing in your life has changed, only because for once you are here to feel it. This is the gold the alchemists gave their lives circling. Not a medal, not a prize buried at the end of the labor. The gold was the consciousness that stops running, the self that can stand in a plain kitchen on a plain evening and find it almost unbearably full. The lead was never your circumstances. The lead was your absence from them. And the instant you return, the same ordinary life you have lived for years turns to gold in your hands, unchanged and entirely transfigured. Understand what that means about the whole long labor. The entire work, every stage of fire and water and descent, was never building a better life out there for you to finally move into. It was building a witness, an awareness clear enough and still enough and present enough to receive the life that was always already here. That was the secret they wrapped in metaphor and guarded for centuries. Not how to turn your gold into more gold, how to become the one who can finally see that the plain lead in your hands was gold all along. And here is the only honest test of whether any of this has landed, the one the old teachers trusted far above any vision or rush of bliss. It comes down to a single word: enough. The grasping self could never once arrive at enough, no matter what you fed it. Every summit only uncovered a higher one. Everything you acquired reset the hunger to zero by morning. The self that rises in the silence is already full, not because it finally got more, but because it no longer needs more in order to be allowed to be here. Enough was never a quantity you were going to reach. It was a place you were always going to have to stand, and you are standing in it now. There is grief in this too, and you should let it come. Because if the life was always here, then you also have to feel the years you spent walking out of it, the dinners you sat through while planning the next thing, the mornings with your children you half missed because part of you was already at the office, the decade you spent waiting to begin living. Sure, it started just up ahead. That grief is not a punishment. It is the last of the ice melting in you. Let it move and let it pass, because the same recognition that shows you what you missed is the one handing back the only moment you ever truly had. This one, still here, still warm, still yours. And the way you honor everything you missed is simple. You stop missing this. Think of the man and his tower. He did not find what he was looking for in his visions, or his fame, or the high reaches of his own remarkable mind. He found it with a rough stone in his hands, beside the water, building something plain and real with no one watching. That was not a retreat from the great work. That was the great work, finished. He had stopped looking up and out and come all the way home, into the ordinary, into the body, into the hour he was actually in. And from that grounded place he did not grow passive or dim. He worked, he built, he created more freely than ever, because what flows from a person who is finally home is steadier and braver than anything the frightened, grasping self ever forced into being. You do not lose your fire when you stop chasing. You only lose the ache underneath it. What remains burns cleaner, and the things you were chasing do not vanish in this. They simply fall back to their true size. Money becomes a tool again, instead of a verdict on whether you are permitted to rest. The dream becomes a preference, instead of a ransom you keep paying your one life to afford. They are free to come to you now, through ordinary doors, in their own time, precisely because you no longer need them to rescue you from your own absence. You stopped chasing, and the things that always flee the chaser are suddenly free to arrive. Notice your breathing, even now, even just sitting here, hearing this. That small loosening in the chest is not an idea you are agreeing with. It is the body recognizing something the mind argued against for years, that you are allowed to be here, that you were always allowed. The permission you spent a whole life trying to earn was yours from the beginning, and you simply never stood still long enough to take it. This is what you carry back up out of the silence. Not a technique, not a method to perform at dawn. One recognition that, once it truly lands, quietly rewrites everything after it. The life you wanted was always the life you were standing in, the moment you were willing to stop leaving it. You do not have to earn your way back here. You were never charged admission. You only have to stop walking out the door. And the strangest part, the part no one who has not felt it will quite believe, is how little it asks of you from here. Not a pilgrimage, not a mountain, not another 20 years, only the willingness, this very ordinary evening, to stay in the room one breath longer than the old you could bear, and then the next breath, and then, tomorrow, to stay again. That is the whole of it. Not one grand homecoming, but 10,000 small ones, each ordinary morning choosing the room you are already in over the one you keep imagining is coming. Your life was never going to begin later. It was only ever going to begin the moment you did. If something in you went quiet while we sat in that silence, if some part of you recognized itself here, the way you recognize a room you lived in long ago, then you already know this is not a one-time idea you file away. It is a practice, and a practice needs company, because you will forget. You will wake tomorrow and the old chaser will be back at the controls before your feet touch the floor. This channel exists for exactly that, for the long, unglamorous work of learning to stay home in your own life. So if you want to keep walking this road, subscribe and walk it with us, not to chase one more thing, to be reminded, on the mornings you forget, how to turn around and come back. You have an answer for that day now. The emptiness was never a sign that you had reached for the wrong thing. It was the echo of a room you walked into and instantly left. The thing in your hands was never going to fill you because the fullness was never in the thing. It was in the one holding it, waiting for the moment that one would finally be there to hold it. And look at the shape of the whole road behind you. The fire that burned down the chaser, the long climb down out of the clouds and into your ordinary life, the silence where the seeker you had always been finally fell. It was never a journey toward a far-off place. It was one long turning around, in the same room you were standing in the entire time. So nothing about your life has to change for this to begin. Not the house, not the work, not the figure in the account you were once afraid to even write down. The signature is still on the contract. The keys are still in the drawer. What changes is the one who comes home to them. The chaser spent decades straining toward a life that lay under his own feet the whole time. You do not have to become more, or get more, or arrive anywhere at all. You only have to stop leaving the room you are already in. That was the entire secret the alchemists wrapped in code and guarded for centuries. The gold was never in the metal. It was in the eyes that learned at last to see what had always been gold. They did not turn lead into treasure. They became the kind of awareness for which the ordinary had been treasure all along. And the life you were chasing, the peace, the prosperity, the sense of being finally enough, does not come crashing in from somewhere out there. the way you always pictured the delivery. It gathers, quietly, around a person who has stopped running, the way warmth gathers near something that finally holds still. It was always a residue, the trace left behind by a change that, the very moment you stopped blocking it, was already moving through you. You will catch it first in small evidence. A morning that does not open with lack, an ordinary afternoon that, for no reason you could point to, feels like enough. A want that rises and passes without taking the whole day hostage. These are not nothing. They are the first light coming back into a room you had stopped seeing. Feel your breath one more time, here, in this plain and unremarkable hour. This is the hour. Not the one just ahead, not the one you are still owed. This one. The question you began with, how do I get the life I want, was the wrong question from the start. And you can feel now why it never gave you an answer. There was never anything to get. There was only someone to become. And that someone was always you, exactly here, in the life you already have. The door was never locked. It was never even closed. You were simply standing with your back to it, certain it was somewhere up ahead. So turn around. You are already home.